Emily is a talented craftswoman who lives in a small town. Her life seems perfect. She is married to Alex, who truly loves her and spends her days doing what she loves. Emily works from home, doing sewing and needlework, creating incredibly beautiful products for local residents. Her house is always filled with warmth, and the table always smells of freshly baked bread or pies. However, recently she began to feel tired and a little sad. Her life seemed predictable and monotonous. In the evening, sitting at her sewing, Emily wondered if she had lost something important in her soul. But even these thoughts did not seem like a serious threat to her. She believed that this was just the result of everyday fatigue. One day, a man asked Emily to go with him to a party organized by his company. Alex worked in a large company where once a year they organized a corporate party for employees and their families. Emily agreed. She had long wanted to break out of her routine and be among people. At the party, Emily attracted the attention of many. Her natural beauty and modesty set her apart from other guests. Alex's colleague, Jake, was especially interested in her, a young, energetic man who had a reputation as a jovial man and a conqueror of women's hearts. Jake started talking to Emily, joking and listening intently to her stories. She, initially restrained, gradually relaxed and began to laugh. She was pleased to feel the attention which she had long lacked in her everyday life. At the end of the evening, Alex was urgently called to work and asked Emily to stay at the party, promising to pick her up in an hour. Emily stayed and continued to chat with the guests. Jake, noticing that she was alone, suggested a walk to the garden, which was not far from the venue. They talked a lot during the walk. Jake was a gallant and attentive conversationalist. He admired her beauty and talent, which moved Emily. After a few glasses of wine, her wariness faded, and she began to feel more relaxed in his company. The walk dragged on, and Jake unexpectedly took Emily's hand. Her heart pounded, but she didn't back down. The moment seemed to her both strange and exciting. He admitted that he had noticed her for a long time in photos from corporate events and was impressed by her beauty and modesty. Jake leaned in to kiss her. At first, Emily pushed him away, but under the influence of emotions and drunk wine, she gave in. That kiss led to a night that Emily would call a mistake, but one that left a deep mark on her heart. She returned home early in the morning, filled with guilt. She was met by Alex, who didn't seem to suspect anything. Emily tried to hide her condition, but she was troubled by the thought of how to continue living with this burden. In the following days, Emily could not find a place for herself. She avoided Alex's gaze and cried at night, remembering the events of that night. Her soul was torn by doubts. Should she confess everything to her husband, or should she try to forget what happened and live as before? The work that used to bring her joy has now become a test for her. She tried to focus on her sewing, but her thoughts kept coming back to Jake. His messages began to appear more and more often. He wrote that he wanted to see her again, and that the night with her was special for him. Emily didn't answer, but each message left her with mixed feelings. On the one hand, she understood that this was wrong, and on the other hand, she felt something similar to excitement, which she had not experienced in a long time. Feeling that she couldn't handle it herself, Emily decided to turn to her friend Martha for advice. Coming to Martha, Emily told her everything, without hiding a single detail. A friend listened to her and said that her soul was confused in two ways. She warned that if Emily didn't make a choice, it could lead to the loss of everything she held dear. Marta gave her two pieces of advice. She could try to rebuild her relationship with her husband by confessing everything and working to rebuild trust. Or she could follow her feelings for Jake. But that path would be filled with pain and uncertainty, and delaying would only add to her suffering. Emily returned home, even more confused, but at the same time feeling that this was her chance to make things right. After much thought, Emily realized that she could no longer live in this state. She decided to meet with Jake first, to dot all the I's once and for all. She wrote him a message asking for a meeting. Jake responded almost immediately and suggested meeting the next day at the cafe. Jake seemed hopeful during the meeting. He said he was ready to do anything to make Emily happy. But she interrupted him and said that their night was a mistake, and she wanted to keep her family. Jake was disappointed but said he respected her decision. Emily was relieved to know now that she had made the right choice. A week after Emily tried to forget the events of that night, Alex announced that he had to go on a business trip for a few days. It was common in their lives, but this time she felt relief rather than sadness at his absence. On her first night alone, Emily received a text from Jake. He asked how she was doing and if she could make time to meet. She hesitated at first, but eventually agreed. She was excited to see him again, despite her guilt. They met in a quiet cafe on the outskirts of the city. Jake looked confident and even a little happy. Emily felt mixed emotions, excitement, and fear at the same time. They talked about everything from her work to his work. Jake tried not to broach the subject of that night, but the look in his eyes showed that he expected more. After dinner, Jake suggested a walk. Emily, despite internal resistance, agreed. Her heart beat faster as he took her hand again. They could not resist and kissed again. The following days of Alex's business trip became a period for Emily when she lost control of the situation. She dated Jake several times. They spent time in the park, in his apartment, enjoying moments that seemed to her both beautiful and forbidden. Emily convinced herself that this was only temporary and would not change her love for her husband. But with each meeting, she felt her feelings for Jake grow stronger. He was attentive, passionate, and she began to see in him what she lacked in marriage. Over time, Emily began to notice that Jake was always avoiding invitations to her house. They spent time only in the hotel. She wondered why he didn't invite her to the real house if their relationship was so important to him. During one of their meetings, she asked him directly, "Why don't you ever invite me to your house?" Jake evaded the answer, saying that his house was not suitable for guests right now, that it was a bachelor's apartment, and it was a mess. Emily began to suspect that Jake was hiding something. It seemed to her that he might not be completely honest with her. One evening, Emily decided to find out for herself. She knew the address of the apartment and decided to go there without warning. Her heart was pounding as she knocked on the door. She imagined she would find Jake there alone, or at least get answers to her questions. However, a strange woman opened the door. She looked confident and was dressed in her home clothes. "Are you looking for something?" the woman asked, looking at Emily curiously. Emily was at a loss, not knowing what to say. Her heart sank in surprise. She finally asked, "Is this Jake's apartment?" The woman nodded and added, "Yes, I am his girlfriend. And who are you?" These words fell on Emily like thunder from a clear sky. She froze, not knowing how to respond. Her suspicions were confirmed, but she was not prepared for such a turn. Emily was confused, but quickly gathered her thoughts. "Oh yeah, sorry. I'm from the landlady. We've been getting complaints about overcharging for utilities, so I came to check the meters," she said, trying to hide her excitement. The woman looked a little surprised, but eventually said, "Well, okay, come in. I think everything is working fine, though." She opened the door wider, letting Emily in. Emily walked in, trying to look confident, but her eyes scanned the apartment carefully. She looked for any sign that Jake was living here with this woman. When Emily finally got home, her emotions were on edge. She tried to hold back her tears, but she couldn't. Sitting on the couch, she cried. At that moment, Alex came in, surprised by her condition. "Emily, what's wrong? Why are you crying?" he asked with concern in his voice. Emily quickly wiped away her tears and tried to pull herself together. "It's okay. It's just that there was a problem at work. I made a mistake in the report and the boss yelled at me," she answered, trying to sound convincing. Alex sat next to her and put his hand on her shoulder. His eyes shone with compassion. "Emily, everyone makes mistakes. It's okay. The important thing is to learn your lesson and not make that mistake again," he said with a soft smile. Emily nodded, but her gaze was still filled with sadness. "I know, but it was an important report. I think I've disappointed not only the boss, but myself." Alex tilted his head slightly and thought, "You always demand so much from yourself, but look at it from the other side. You try, and even if something goes wrong, it doesn't make you a bad worker or a bad person." Emily looked at him, feeling relieved for the first time all evening. His words, though simple, were filled with the support she so desperately lacked. "Thank you, Alex," she said quietly. "I just want to be perfect." "But you're already perfect," he replied softly, smiling. For me, at least. Emily couldn't hold back a small smile, even though her eyes were a little red from tears. You always know how to support me. Alex stood up and held out his hand to her. Now let's do something to cheer you up. How about pizza and your favorite TV show? Emily took his hand and stood up. Sounds great. Thank you, Alex. I'm so grateful to have you around. Emily decided not to leave this question unresolved. She needed to know the truth, even if it was painful. The next day, she texted Jake to meet at a cafe near his apartment. He reluctantly agreed. Jake looked tense as they sat down at the table, avoiding her gaze. Emily was not going to back down. Jake, I can't ignore what happened anymore. Who was that woman in your apartment? And don't lie, I want the truth, she said, crossing her arms over her chest. Jake sighed heavily and finally looked up at her. Emily, you have a right to know. But what I'm about to tell you is going to surprise you. That woman, she's not living with me because I wanted to. It was your husband, Alex, who set it up. Emily looked at him in surprise, not believing her ears. What did you just say? Alex, what's he doing here? He came to see me a few weeks ago. Jake paused as if trying to find the right words. He said that he had agreed with the owner of the apartment that this woman would live with me. Emily felt her hands go cold. Follow you? Why? That's why I didn't invite you to my house, because I didn't want to set you up, Jake explained, his voice shaking. He did it to break our trust with each other. I didn't want you to find out like this, but I had to let her stay, or it would look suspicious. Emily leaned back in her chair, her head spinning. Alex knew about their affair, and he decided to play these manipulative games instead of just talking to her. You could have told me earlier, Jake, she finally replied. I was ready for the truth, but you chose to remain silent. Now I don't even know who to trust. Emily, I didn't mean to drag you into this, Jake said, leaning into her. I was afraid of losing you. Emily left the cafe, leaving Jake alone. Her emotions boiled. Anger, disappointment, pain. She realized that she was at the center of the manipulations of two men, and the only way to escape was to start acting independently, making decisions only for herself. She needed to think things over. Emily walked quickly down the street, trying to collect her thoughts. She felt betrayed not only by Jake, but also by Alex. His manipulations seemed humiliating to her, even if they were dictated by jealousy. She needed to talk to him, immediately. When she returned home, Alex met her at the door. His face looked calm, but there was hidden fear in his eyes. Emily, you're back early. How was your walk? He tried to start a conversation, but her sharp look made him shut up. There's no need for this talk. We need to talk, and you know exactly what, she said as she walked past him into the living room. Alex stayed where he was, as if considering whether to run. But then, sighing heavily, he followed her. Emily, I'll explain, he began, but she stopped him with a wave of her hand. No, I'm going to talk now. You knew about me and Jake. You chose not to find out about the relationship. You didn't try to understand what went wrong in our marriage. You just played a manipulative game. You brought Sarah to his apartment was she watching us? To make me feel guilty? Is that your plan? Alex rubbed his hands nervously, trying to find the words. I didn't know how else to do it, Emily. You've been cold to me for the past few months. I could see things were changing between us. And then I realized why. I wanted you to understand what it's like to live a lie. Emily shuddered at the words. Did you think this would make me come back to you? That I would thank you for this game? Alex, you've only made our problems worse. You've destroyed the trust we already had. But you also betrayed me. His voice rose, and a gleam appeared in his eyes. You chose someone else, and I was just trying to understand why. Do you even know how much that hurt me? Emily felt her heart sink. Yes, she knew that Alex was suffering, but this did not justify his actions. I'm not saying I was right, she answered more quietly, but your response was manipulation, not conversation. Our marriage has been falling apart for a long time, and we're both to blame. You chose not to fight for us, but to fight me. Alex was silent, his shoulders slumped. He looked confused, as if he had just realized how far he had come. She went to the bedroom, leaving Alex alone. This night was long and difficult for both of them. Emily decided to start a new page in her life, but now, without manipulation and lies, only with the truth. no matter how bitter it is. A few days later, Alex packed his things and left home. His last look at Emily was filled with sadness and guilt, but she remained unmoved. It pained her that their marriage ended this way, but she knew it was the only right decision. Emily was relieved when the door closed behind Alex. For the first time in a long time, her house seemed quiet and peaceful, but at the same time there was an emptiness inside. She knew she needed to deal with her feelings for Jake. The next day she decided to meet him. After writing a short message, Emily asked Jake to come to the same cafe where they last saw each other. He had arrived earlier and was already waiting for her, looking anxious and tired. When Emily sat down at the table, they stared at each other in silence for a few seconds. "Emily, I don't know why you wanted to meet, but I want to say, I'm sorry I wasn't honest with you earlier," Jake began with a sigh. "I didn't want to get you into this situation, but I didn't know what to do." Emily nodded, her gaze serious. "It's my fault, too. I let our relationship go too far without dealing with my marriage, but now it's over. Alex is gone, and I want to start with a clean slate." Jake looked at her in surprise. "Do you really want this? After everything that happened?" "Yes," Emily replied firmly, "but only on one condition. There will be no more lies between us. If we decide to be together, then only honestly and openly." Jake looked at her intently, and then his face softened. "I promise, Emily. I won't hide anything. You're important to me, and I want things to be right this time." She smiled, feeling something like happiness for the first time in a long time. "Okay, let's start over then." They talked for a long time, discussing their mistakes and plans for the future. Emily knew that it would not be easy ahead, but now she was sure. She was ready for a new life and a new relationship. And this time, everything will be for real. A few weeks later, when Emily's life began to return to normal, she accidentally learned something that changed her perception of all events. One day, entering a supermarket, she saw Alex. He was not alone. Sarah was next to him. They seemed much closer than mere acquaintances allowed. Emily stopped dead in her tracks, her heart suddenly racing. She watched them from a far distance, seeing them laughing and acting as if there was more than just an arrangement between them. When they left the supermarket, she decided to act. Gathering all her resolve, Emily caught up with them in the parking lot. "Sarah, Alex, what is it?" Her voice shook with anger, but she tried to look calm. Alex and Sarah shuddered when they saw her. Sarah looked confused, and Alex quickly assumed a defensive posture. "Emily, it's not what you think," Alex began, but she cut him off. "Not what I think? Oh, please. First you hire her to spy on me, and now I see you together, and you don't look like we're just acquaintances. How long has this been going on, Alex?" Sarah ducked her head, trying to avoid Emily's gaze. But Alex realized that there was no point in lying anymore. "Okay, Emily, yes, Sarah and I did have a relationship," he admitted, his voice muffled. "It started before I knew about you and Jake. I was lost. You started pulling away and I was looking for support. Sarah was there." Emily stared at him, feeling her anger turn into deep pain. "So all your spying games was just a cover. You didn't do it because you wanted to save our marriage, but to justify your own betrayal?" Sarah finally spoke. "Emily, I didn't mean for it to go this far. It was a mistake. I shouldn't have agreed to it. I'm sorry." "And you shouldn't have come into my house," Emily replied coldly, looking directly at Sarah. She turned back to Alex. "You betrayed me more than I could have imagined, and now I see who you really are. I don't want to hear anything from you again." Without waiting for an answer, Emily went to her car. Her world was rocked again, but this time she felt the strength to move on. Alex and Sarah are left behind, as are all their lies. That night she met Jake and told him everything. Jake listened to her, supported her, and this time there was only the truth between them. Emily realized that she could finally leave the past behind and build a new life based on trust and honesty. After talking with Jake, Emily finally decided to leave the past behind. She realized that she no longer wants to look back at the mistakes, manipulations, and betrayals that were in her life. She made the decision to build her future with Jake, but already with the awareness that trust and honesty are the basis of any relationship. Jake, in turn, sincerely apologized for everything he had hidden and promised never to let her down again. Together, they decided to start with a clean slate. Their meetings grew more and more warm, and Emily had a feeling that this time things would be different. To finally say goodbye to the past, Emily moved to another city. It was a bold move, but she wanted to start a new chapter in her life, leaving behind everything that reminded her of difficult times. Jake supported her in this and also moved in with her. A new city, a new life, and a new chance for happiness. Emily and Jake began to build their relationship on mutual support and respect. Emily no longer felt the burden of the past and knew that she was now moving forward with a man who was willing to go with her to the end. And although Emily and Alex had parted ways forever, she no longer felt resentment or pain. It was an important lesson that helped her figure out what she wanted out of life. Now her heart was open to happiness, and she was ready for a new, better future. Her story ended not with a broken heart, but with a new beginning that promised to be bright and filled with love.